All right, so Island of the Blue Dolphins. Today we're going to do chapters 4 and 5. Kind of got some exciting stuff that's going to happen today. So if you remember, the Russian captain and some of his Aleut, not really soldiers, but his crew for sure, and hunters, they're on the island and they've been hunting the otter, and Karana and her family have been watching them and making sure that everyone's doing what they're supposed to do. So we're going to continue on with the story. So let me go ahead and pull it up now so that you can follow along. All right, so chapter 4. I wonder what it looks like if I do this. Maybe a little bit bigger. The Aleuts left on a sunless day. Out of the north, deep waves rolled down upon the island. They broke against the rocks and roared into the caves, sending up white sprays of water. Before night, a storm would certainly strike. Not long after dawn, the Aleuts took down their skin tents and carried them to the beach. Captain Orloff had not paid my father for the otter he had killed. So when the news came that the hunters had packed their tents, all of our tribe left the village and hurried toward Coral Cove. The men with their weapons went first, and the women followed. The men took the trail that led to the beach, but the women hid themselves among the brush on the cliff. Ulape and I went together far out on the ledge where I had hidden before when the hunters first came. The tide was low, and the rocks and the narrow beach were scattered with bundles of otter pelts. Half of the hunters were on the ship. The rest were wading into the water, tossing the pelts into a boat. The Aleuts laughed while they worked, as if they were happy to leave the island. My father was talking to Captain Orlov. I could not hear their words because of the noise the hunters made, but from the way my father shook his head, I knew he was not pleased. "He is angry," Ulape whispered. "Not yet," I said. "When he's really angry, he pulls his ear." The men who were working on the canoe had stopped and were watching my father and Captain Orlov. The other men of our tribe stood at the foot of the trail. The boat went off to the ship filled with otter. As it reached the ship, Captain Orlov raised his hand and gave a signal. When the boat came back, it held a black chest which two of the hunters carried to the beach. Captain Orlov raised the lid and pulled out several necklaces. There was little light in the sky, yet the beads sparkled as he named them this way. I'm wondering if that's a typo, as he held them this way and that. Beside me, Ulape drew in her breath in excitement, and I could hear cries of delight from the women hidden in the brush. But the cry suddenly ceased as my father shook his head and turned his back on the chest. The Aleuts stood silent. Our men left their places at the foot of the trail and moved forward a few steps and waited, watching my father. "One string of beads for one otter pelt is not our bargain," my father said. "One string and one iron spearhead," said Captain Orlov, lifting 2 fingers. "The chest does not hold that much," my father answered. "There are more chests on the ship," said the Russian. "Then bring them to the shore," my father said. "You have 105 bales of otter on the ship. There are 15 here in the cove. You will need 3 more chests of this size." Captain Orlov said something to his Aleuts that I could not understand, but its meaning was soon clear. There were many hunters in the cove, and as soon as he spoke, they began to carry the otter pelts to the boat. Beside me, Ulape was scarcely breathing. "Do you think he will give us the other chests?" she whispered. I do not trust him. When he gets the pelts to the ship, he may leave. It is possible. The hunters had to pass my father to reach the boat, and when the first one approached him, he stepped in his path. The rest of the pelts must stay here, he said, facing Captain Orlov, until the chests are brought. The Russian drew himself up stiffly and pointed to the clouds that were blowing toward the island. I load the ships before the storm arrives, he said. Give us the other chests. Then I will help you with our canoes, my father replied. Captain Orlov was silent. His gaze moved slowly around the cove. He looked at our men standing on the ledge of a rock a dozen paces away. He looked upward towards the cliff and back at my father. Then he spoke to his Aleuts. I do not know what happened first, whether it was my father who raised his hand against the hunters, whose path he barred, whether it was this man who stepped forward with a bale of pelts on his back and shoved my father aside. It all happened so quickly that I could not tell one act from the other. But as I jumped to my feet and Ulape screamed and other cries sounded along the cliff, I saw a figure lying on the rocks. It was my father, and blood was on his face. Slowly he got to his feet. With their spears raised, our men rushed down across the ledge. A puff of white smoke came from the deck of the ship. A loud noise echoed against the cliff. Boom! 5 of our warriors fell and lay quiet. Ulape screamed again and hung a rock into the cove. It fell harmlessly beside Captain Orlov. Rocks showered into the cove from many places along the cliff, striking several of the hunters. Then our warriors rushed in upon them, and it was hard to tell one from the other. Ulape and I stood on the cliff and watched helplessly, afraid to use the rocks we held lest we injure our own men. The Aleuts had dropped the bales of otter. They drew knives from their belts, and as our warriors rushed upon them, the 2 lines surged back and forth along the beach. Men fell to the sand and rose to fight again. Others fell and did not get up. My father was one of these. For a long time it seemed that we would win the battle, but Captain Orlov, who had rowed off to the ship when the battle started, returned with more of his Aleuts. Our warriors were forced backward to the cliffs. There were few of them left, yet they fought at the foot of the trail and would not retreat. The wind began to blow. Suddenly, Captain Orlov and his Aleuts turned and ran to the boat. Our men did not pursue them. The hunters reached the ship. The red sails went up, and that ship moved slowly between the 2 rocks that guard the cove. Once more, before it disappeared, a white puff of smoke rose from the deck. As Ulape and I ran along the cliffs, a whirring sound like a great bird in flight passed over our heads. The storm struck as we ran, driving rain into our faces. Then other women were running beside us, and their cries were louder than the wind. At the bottom of the trail, we came upon our warriors. Many had fought on the beach, few had left it, and of these all were wounded. My father lay on the beach, and the waves were already washing over him. Looking at his body, I knew we should not have told Captain Orlov his secret name. And back in our village, all the weeping women and the sad men agreed that this had so weakened him that he had not lived through the fight with the Aleuts and the dishonest Russian. Chapter 5 is short. That night, the most terrible time and all that was the most terrible time. Let's try that again. Chapter 5. That night was the most terrible time in all the memory of Galasat. When the fateful day had dawned, the tribe numbered 42 men, counting those who were too old to fight. When night came, and the women had carried back to the village those who had died on the beach of Coral Cove, there remained only 15. Of these, 7 were old men. There was no woman who had not lost a father or a husband, a brother or a son. The storm lasted 2 days, and the third day we buried our dead on the south headland. The Aleuts who had fallen on the beach, we burned. For many days after that, the village was quiet. People went out only to gather food and came back to eat in silence. Some wished to leave and go in their canoes to the island called Santa Catalina, which lies far off to the east. But others said that there was little water on the island. In the end, the council was held, and it was decided to stay at Galasat. The council also chose a new chief to take my father's place. His name was Kimki. He was very old, but he had been a good man in his youth and a good hunter. The night he was chosen to be chief, he called everyone together, saying, "Most of those who snared fowl and found fish in the deep water and built canoes are gone. The women, who were never asked to do more than stay at home, cook food, and make clothing, must now take the place of the men and face the dangers which abound beyond the village. There will be grumbling at Galasat because of this. There will be shirkers. These will be punished, for without the help of all must perish." Kimki portioned work for each one in the tribe, giving Ulape and me the task of gathering abalones. This shellfish grew on the rocks along the shore and was plentiful. We gathered them at low tide in baskets and carried them to the mesa, where we cut the dark red flesh from the shell and placed it on flat rocks to dry in the sun. Ramo had the task of keeping the abalones safe from the gulls, and especially the wild dogs. Dozens of our animals, which had left the village when their owners had died, joined the wild pack that roamed the island. They soon grew as fierce as the wild ones and only came back to the village to steal food. Each day towards evening, Ulape and I helped Ramo put the abalones in baskets and carry them to the village for safekeeping. During this time, other women were gathering the scarlet apples that grow on the cactus bushes and are called tunas. Fish were also caught, and many birds netted. So hard did the women work that we really fared better than before, when the hunting was done by the men. Life in the village should have been more peaceful, but it was not. The men said that the women had taken the tasks that rightfully were theirs, and now that they had become hunters, the men looked down upon them. There was much trouble over this until Kimki decreed that the work should again be divided. Henceforth, the men would hunt and the women harvest. Since there was already ample food to last through the winter, it no longer mattered who hunted. But this was not the real reason why autumn and winter were unpeaceful at Galasat. Those who had died at Coral Cove were still with us. Everywhere we went on the island or on the sea, whether we were fishing or eating or sitting by the fires at night, they were with us. We all remembered someone, and I remembered my father, so tall and strong and kind. A few years ago, my mother had died, and since then, Ulape and I had tried to do the tasks she had done. Ulape even more than I, being older. Now that my father was gone, it was not easy to look after Ramo, who was always into some mischief. It was the same in the other houses at Galasat. But more than the burdens which had fallen upon us all, it was the memory of those who had gone that burdened our hearts. After food had been stored in autumn and the baskets were full in every house, there was more time to drink. Sorry, that's probably another typo. It should be to think about them. So that a sort of sickness came over the village, and people sat and did not speak. nor ever laughed. In the spring, Kimki called the tribe together. He had been thinking, he said. During the winter, he had decided that he would take a canoe and go to the east, to a country which was there, and which he had once been to when he was a boy. It lay many days across the sea, but he would go there and make a place for us. He would go alone because he could not spare more of our men for the voyage, and he would return. The day that Kimki left was fair. We all went to the cove and watched him launch the big canoe. It held 2 baskets of water and enough tunas and dried abalone to last many days. We watched while Kimki paddled through the narrow openings in the rocks. Slowly, he went through the kelp beds and into the sea. There he waved to us, and we waved back. The rising sun made a silver trail across the water. Along this trail, he disappeared into the east. The rest of the day, we talked about the journey. Would Kimki ever reach this far country about which nothing was known? Would he come back before the winter was over? Or never? That night, we sat around the fire and talked while the wind blew and the waves crashed against the shore. Okay. Battle. Death. Ugh. Terrible. All right. So the Russians are offering necklaces with different beads and things. So that's what's in the chest. Okay. Cries of delight. Woohoo. They were excited about what they saw. It was pretty. They liked it. You see this in pirate movies. It was probably a chest or a box that looks something like that. Okay, the bale of pelts. So here on the left, we have what we call bales of hay. Bale is simply when you take a bunch of stuff and you squish it together. Okay, so the pelts are the skins of animals, and so they kind of would take all the skins and tie them up into a big clump. All right, poof, puff of white smoke. What do you think that was? The ship is off in the distance of the ocean. Okay. Is it still working? I hope so. It looks like it's working. All right. So the puff of white smoke, it's probably a cannon that was on the ship that poof, was shot off. All right, a little distracted. Hopefully that's still recording here. All right. The waves were already washing over him. What do you think this means? It said that he was knocked down, he was cut, and then the battle happens and the waves were washing over him. Probably means that he was dead and he was killed. And weeping. It's a cry. It's a sad, quiet crying. It's tears. The dishonest Russian, a liar. So here we've got someone crossing their fingers, which is a way to say, sure, I'll do my homework. The cheating on the hand, it's dishonest. Pinocchio tells the lies and his nose grows. Some ways we talk about dishonesty. All right, the headland, kind of the top part of the cliffs of an island. So here are some examples showing these pictures of the headlands. Kind of, if we think about the head as the top of our body and the front facing part, the headland also is the head of the land, the top part that faces outwards. Woo. All right, snared. You can see this elephant has its leg wrapped up. The fox has been caught. You can see the tiny little line there. Fowl is another word for bird. So to snare a fowl is to capture a bird. Shirkers, it's a fun word. Say it with me, shirkers. Shirkers. Yeah, somebody who doesn't do the work. So you got people sitting around on their cell phones, not working. Got people playing with paper airplanes at work. You got dads sitting around reading the comics while everybody else is getting ready to do stuff. The word perish means to die, and unfortunately, many of the warriors had perished. Abalones is a particular type of shellfish. It's a shell, and there's meat in it. There's an animal that lives inside it. You crack it open, and you eat the meat out of it. The shellfish, the abalone. All right, wild dogs. We're going to see a lot of wild dogs in this story. There's a picture of hyenas here. Probably not hyenas on the island, but if you look at the book, we do have a picture of kind of a wolf-looking dog. All right, a burden. A burden is a heavy weight that you carry. And so if it burdens your heart, it makes you sad. All right, so we can see down here at the very left, there's a little blue thing, San Nicolas Island. This is a real island, okay? And they go to the east where you got Catalina Island, and then move a little further over, and I put a little green dot there for the school, Buena Park. That's where we're at. So if you've ever been out to the coast here, Long Beach especially, you can often see out to Catalina. You can take a boat ride to Catalina. And this is a little further out, San Nicolas Island. So it's pretty far, 115 miles from the island, okay? So I think, let's see here, I've got a note here. Let me do this. Let's see here. The average paddler travels 3 miles per hour. So if it's 115 miles, that's almost 40 hours of paddling. Whew. That is a lot of time paddling for one person to paddle 40 hours. Think how many hours you can paddle in a day. Okay, so let's say, a working day is 8 hours. Paddle for 8 hours, 10 hours, half a day, and then sleep for some time, rest. How many days is that going to take you? Whew, that is a serious trip. All right, so the battle, unfortunately, lots of people were killed. Kimki is trying to get to the coast of California, this ancient, distant land that he visited once as a boy, hopefully finding some help. All right, hopefully you're enjoying the story. I don't know if you saw any of that. I don't know. That's a bummer. All right, well, call it good for now.